welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bob Price. I'm the Press and Analyst Relations Manager for Digital's Unix-based software and systems. And I want to thank you for being here this afternoon. We have, as you can see from the screen here on your left, an audience as well as the one here in Maynard out on the West Coast in our Palo Alto facility. So the purpose is to make sure that both those of you here on the East Coast and our West Coast friends have an opportunity to hear what our executives will be presenting this afternoon, and also to ask questions. The agenda is revised slightly, but it will follow more or less the format that you see here. Oh, sure. I will, actually, I'd prefer to stand right back here. How's that? The farther in the corner, the better. This afternoon's briefing was pulled together primarily to address the mixed messages which have been appearing in a number of different areas that we wanted to make sure we addressed with the people who have the responsibility for our overall strategy in the Unix market and the present-day RISC products. We've seen both from our customers, from financial analysts, from industry analysts, in the press, a variety of different accounts, and we certainly want to make sure that it's clear after today exactly where we're going, both with regard to the operating system activities and with regard to Digital's commitment to its present architecture based on the MIPS architecture. Today, you'll hear from David Stone, who is our Vice President of Software Engineering, and also from Charlie Christ, who's Vice President of our SME and Departmental Systems and Software. In addition, up here in the front of the room is Don Gaubetz, who many of you know is the Vice President of our Workstations and Servers Development, and Matt Cochin, who is the Group Manager for Marketing for those products. We also have a number of other people in the room who are from our software area and hardware area, so if any questions arise which require more detailed answers, we'll be happy to address those for you. Our presentation, although you will receive a presentation package, is really going to be much more informal than we had thought originally. We're going to have some brief remarks by David, and then basically open things up to your questions, and we would hope that as a result of today's briefing that all of your questions would be answered either in this open session or through questions that you might ask afterward when we break for a more informal discussion. So at this point, I'd like to turn the microphone over to David Stone and let him discuss with you our OSF directions.
Thanks, Bob. You can be all comfortable if I sit while I'm talking? Okay. Basically, the reason we're having this discussion with you is that a couple of months ago, we had done some work on what we should be doing with our Unix and OSF1 investments in particular. And we came to the conclusion that we should focus on the Alpha platform for that. And we talked to a lot of people about that. And at the time, we said, and I said specifically, that we had made this decision, but that we needed to make sure that we listened to our customers to find out whether they thought that was a great idea. Having spent the last couple of months listening to hundreds of customers and our own people in the field and so on, we've concluded that there is such a demand for the OSF1 technology, specifically on the MIPS platform, that we are going to support that path as well. Let me show you a picture that explains what happened and why we have made this decision. That's not the word, sorry. Basically, where you are on this picture today is you're either here at the Ultrix R3000 platform, or you might be here if you're one of the set of ISVs who has been working to port their applications to OSF1 on the R3000 preparatory to moving on to other platforms. We discovered that there are basically three paths that people wanted to pursue. Path number one was the Ultrix R3000 platform moving to the Ultrix R4000 platform, which is a shift of chip underneath but not of operating system, and then eventually coming downward to the OSF1 operating system, either on the R4000 or moving directly to an alpha position. So one path could be Ultrix R3000, Ultrix R4000, OSF1 R4000, OSF1 alpha. And one of the things that we learned was that people, a lot of people, not all, were very interested, who had this installed base, were interested in moving one thing at a time, either one operating system change or one chip change, but not both. Another path that people might take is to go from Ultrix on the R3000 directly to an alpha OSF1 platform. That's a two-shift. And typically that would not be people who had an existing set of applications, but rather people who were developing new applications which they plan to deploy first on an alpha platform. Another choice basically would be to go from Ultrix R3000 to OSF1 R3000. Again, a single shift, in this case the operating system but not the chip, and then move forward from there to either OSF1 on the 4000 or OSF1 on alpha. So basically, because those multiple migration paths exist, we concluded after talking to our customers that that's what we needed to produce, was the operating system and platforms necessary for all those three paths to continue to be usable. And that's what we've done. So that's the simple statement of what we decided. I have a significant number of other details, but as does Charlie, but we concluded that since that's probably the primary thing you wanted to talk about, we'd tell you that, and then let you ask questions and let you guide us as to which of the other details you'd like to know about.
So at this point, if you have questions that you'd like to ask of David, Charlie, or Don, or Matt, please do so. And they'll be happy to answer them to the best of their ability.
If none of you have questions, I can do the keyword association trick. I'll say a word and you'll ask a question. Yeah.
What has the recent acquisition of MIPS by Silicon Graphics done to your investment?
Okay, so the question is, what has the recent Silicon Graphics investment in MIPS or acquisition of MIPS done to our investment or our plans in this area? Well, from a technical perspective, the fact that someone else owns the company doesn't change its technology a whole lot. So there's no particular change to our evaluation of what the architecture is good for or what the chip is good for. In the context of the ACE consortium, the new owner provides an opportunity for people to ask questions and what are the new directions going to be, but nothing has specifically changed as far as I know. So in actual fact, we're a member of the board of ACE. We haven't changed anything. I mean, it would give you an opportunity to wonder, perhaps, but we have not changed anything with regard to that. It might be worth saying from a software person's perspective that the goal of the ACE group was to provide a stable software platform for people to write applications to across a set of hardware delivered by multiple vendors. And in particular, those two interfaces that were discussed were a Windows environment and an OSF1 environment. And that hasn't changed, nor has it changed for us. And in fact, if you look at our Alpha platform, we've put both of those interfaces on top. So on the software side, there's been very little change at all.
Is there a question from the West Coast?
Great, Ami, to speak up a little. Yes, there is.
There has been published report suggesting that tomorrow digital would be present at the UNIX announcement and offer support for that announcement. I was wondering how that relates to your continuing support of Ultrix and OSF1.
Okay, this question is about the fact that Unix Software Labs is making an announcement on the West Coast tomorrow, and they will be announcing their so-called Destiny product, or Unix System 5 Release 4.2. And the question related to our presence there and how we felt about that. Basically, Unix System 5 4.2 is another Unix implementation, and we have three different things to say about it. Number one thing is that it's particularly nice that we will see an endorsement by USL of the Open Software Foundation layered products and interfaces. So this is, of course, before the fact, but I'm telling you what I understand is going to happen, that there will be an endorsement by Roel Pieper of various of the OSF layered technologies and interfaces. And I think for the Unix industry as a whole, this is an excellent thing. By and large, OSF's open procurement of technology process has been endorsed by most everybody, and I think that's good. So we strongly endorse that. The second thing is that we will announce that our network application support packages, which we announced last October with a rollout plan for multiple platforms, both digital and other, will in fact be made available on top of the USL operating system, just as we've announced that we will make it available on top of HP's UX and IBM's AIX. So that's simply a continuation of a previous strategy which we have announced. And that's for the purpose of providing a consistent applications environment for people who have already decided that NAS is an appropriate way for them to port themselves to different platforms. And thirdly, there will be a statement that from a technology perspective, both USL and digital are prepared to help anyone who felt like porting the USL product to the Alpha platform. Just as we have said, Alpha being an open chip, we'll help anybody who wants to port things to it, or for that matter, who wants to buy the chip or the board or the process. So those are the three things that we will say tomorrow. That does not say that we are shipping their operating system. We have no plans to do that. But it is another operating system in the Unix space. It has a significant share, and it would be very logical for us to put our layered products on top of it in the same way that we do with HP and IBM.
Question here.
Follow-up question?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay.
It's not a follow-up, it's a minor question. It seems that Berkeley is terminating in support of the Berkeley development, and I was wondering if that in any way impacts your commitment to Ultrix.
So the question is, if Berkeley is terminating its support for its version of Unix, would that impact our ability to support Ultrix? And first of all, I'm not alert to the fact that they're planning to do that, but if you assume that they were, the answer is no. We are continuing to support Ultrix on both the R3000 and the R4000, and we're quite capable of doing that without their help if necessary.
Yes, there was a question here.
Could you put some scale on the timeline on that chart?
Okay, the little red line is today, right?
Sure.
And our intention is to complete this set of migration paths by the end of calendar 93. And you see these things roughly in order, proportionally from a graphic perspective.
Back to the earlier question, how will digital vote on the merger between MIPS and Silicon Graphics as an equity holder in the company?
Okay, this question is considering, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, considering digital as an owner of equity in MIPS, therefore a member of the board, how will we vote with respect to the merger with Silicon Graphics and MIPS? The simplest answer is I don't honestly know, but if I were to guess what our board member would do, they would look at the longevity of the corporation, the MIPS corporation, and would conclude that it would be wise for them to be acquired for the purpose of gaining the cash, and that we would probably say that's a good idea, looked at as an investor, which is what you would normally want to do from the board's perspective.
Another question from
Question
the
from
West
Mike
Coast.
Berwin.
Go ahead, Mike.
Okay. The question is, Why doesn't the Intel platform appear on any of these pictures with Digital's, what seems to be a major commitment to that platform in the workstation arena?
Okay, so
It
the
seems
question
like
is,
there ought to be something
yeah,
there.
the question is, why doesn't the Intel platform appear on this chart? Well, the purpose of this chart, it was constructed to show MIPS. So that's the first reason why it doesn't appear. The purpose here was to demonstrate what's happening between the MIPS and then the Alpha platform and migration of the Unix operating system. Digital today sells a large number of Unix-based platforms, PC Area, for example. We sell products with OS/2 on them, with MS-DOS on them, with SCO on them. So we could have made a chart that showed Intel, but that was not our purpose for today, so we just didn't put it on.
Question
Another
here.
question?
Yes, you've mentioned upgrades to the R4000 using daughterboard. Is there any commitment to support the MIPS platform beyond the R4000? And if not, does that mean that current MIPS customers face a chip change at some stage in the future?
Don Galvatz will answer that question.
The response to the question, what are we going to do for MIPS-based follow-ons, is that we will continue to use the R4000 daughter card technology, which started with the R3000s, of course, because we have found that it's a very effective way to keep the base platform in place, which includes all of the built-in and embedded I/O, all of the turbo channel options, the power supply, and everything outside the box, and to allow the user who's made that investment in the base platform to just move right up the microprocessor technology curve. Now, from what we understand about the farther off planned MIPS microprocessors, it looks to us like we would be able to continue, even if necessary, beyond the R4000 technology and still use the same, approach to daughter cards. We deal with the MIPS semiconductor vendors every day. To relate to an earlier question, I see no difficulties whatsoever in accessing MIPS microprocessor technology, so that'll be the plan for the future.
Question here and there.
You just said if necessary. What does that mean?
No, we plan to use whatever microprocessor technology is available from the MIPS semiconductor vendors. And I didn't mean to put any qualifiers on that at all. In fact, in the handout that you just have are the details about the 33 megahertz R3000 card. And the logistics will be a little difficult. Let me just hold up here. Mr. Coaching's going to hold my microphone. We want to give you some evidence that the daughter card technology is alive and well at Central Engineering. And here we have the first public site of the R4000 daughter card. Now this is in true engineering form, an engineering sample. You can see the wires sticking out. That's the R4000 at the bottom with a big heat sink on it. The other chip at the top is a software programmable piece of hardware, and there's a few wires coming off of it. If you could hold the mic again, Matt. I have in my pocket, people accuse me of always having something like this in my pocket. I don't know why. I have in my pocket the application-specific integrated circuit, the ASIC, which will replace this circuitry right here. So what you see is, in addition to the flexibility of the daughter card, the interface ASIC, you see this long list of cache RAM on here. And I'm going to show you give you a peek at the other side as we move forward with higher performance processors, which can use more faster cache. We can actually put cache on the backside. So this is a very flexible platform which allows us to go forward. R4000, R5000, in response to the demand and the application of the technology.
What speed is that R4000 chip that you're using now?
Well, the speed on this is not an indicator of product. This is in debug stage. So the R4000, as you know, starts with 50 megahertz. The other points are 60 or 67, and then beyond there past 75. So we're debugging the ASICs right now with this. This really works, so I'm being a little careful in not handing it around.
Are you waiting for the 75 megahertz version to be available before you start delivering an R4000 upgrade?
We're looking at how we would roll out either the 67 or the greater. We just haven't finished our qualifications on it yet. We look at all that stuff. Thank you.
Question from the West Coast.
No hands have been raised.
Another question here. Mary Frank.
What is causing the delay in OSF1 on the deck stations? There are a lot of customers that seem to be expecting it this summer by early fall, and now it's into 93. If the development wasn't stopped at some point, why do they have to wait longer now? What is the problem?
Well, in actual fact, the question is about what is the delivery date for the OSF1 software and whether that was impacted by the decision that we took earlier and that we visited here. Well, the actual delivery date that we had been planning for the OSF1 next version, you can see version 1.0 there, and the 1.2 version, that had always been at the end of this calendar year, not earlier than that. And what we did when we took the Alpha Focus decision was we said, let's make that first release be on the Alpha chip. And that is the current plan, as you can see. And the plan is then to move that same system onto the R3000 platform. So the change is not that the delivery of the technology itself changed, but rather that the platform we focused it on was changed. And then we will take that first on the Alpha and then move it to the R3000. So there's no underlying technology problem related to the software alone. It was just a retargeting decision.
What will the software
We have a
developers
question
do?
from Lead Animation.
There's a follow-up question here, David.
I was wondering, what about the software developers who were expecting to get OSF1 by the end of the summer and have applications ready for Alpha? There were some that I talked to that seemed very concerned that they couldn't wait until next year to get the production quality OSF1 to work with. They seem to be worried that some of the smaller ones might even go out of business because of this.
So the question here is about the utility of the OSF1 platform in the short term for people who are ISVs, for example, who are porting their applications, and whether there's a problem in not having what's labeled here the version 1.2 release available sooner. Well, of course, there is the version 1 release available, has been available since March. It was the first one in the market, still is, and is on the cheapest RISC platform around also. So it's a very convenient platform for people who want to start development. The technology of it is such that the majority of all of the porting work can be done on the 1.0 platform. So we do not believe that for the development of applications purposes, that's a big deal. We had never planned to deliver the OSF1 1.2 release on MIPS earlier than the end of the year. So if people were expecting it then that was for a reason that is beyond my purview. So that could be an issue if they were expecting it, but from the point of view of delivery, it's going to be later in 93 rather than right at the end of the year, which was our original plan because of the retargeting for Alpha.
David, you
We
had
have
a
a
question
question
on
from
this
Lead
one?
Tape. Yes, we do. Lead, go ahead.
Yes, I had two questions. One was, if I understood you right at the beginning of this press conference, you said the original plans had been to dump the MIPS operation and just go to Alpha, and I'm wondering if you could give us a little more insight as to why you thought you could do that in the first place and how they're positioned relative to each other now. The second question is, from the viewpoint of an applications developer, looking at both a choice between DEC Alpha and DEC R3000, R4000 platforms, will there be any difference, or will you sustain the kind of hardware abstraction layer that the ACE initiative has talked about?
Okay, let me go with the first question first. The first question was more or less, why did we decide initially to target OSF1 for Alpha directly? And the answer to that is that when we did the analysis, we were looking at people who were doing applications and talking about the requirement for very high performance, which we observed would be better met in the Alpha environment than in the MIPS environment. What in hindsight we can say we did not do correctly was to evaluate the number of people who were happily running their applications on the R3000 platform with Ultrix and who were happy to continue running it with Ultrix on the R4000. And in addition, we're interested in having OSF1 in production on the MIPS platforms. So we misevaluated the requirement for the high performance end. I said we thought that was the primary requirement, and looking back at it, that was not the real case. Could you summarize the second question for me once again?
I'm just wondering what the difference will be from a software developer's perspective between an alpha or a MIPS chip being his target platform if he's working under OSF1. In other words, are you sustaining this idea of a hardware abstraction layer for both chips?
So basically, there's two parts to this question as I hear it. One is, if you are developing an application, how hard will it be for you to get from one place to another place, whether it be Ultrix on the R3000 to OSF1 on the alpha or the various passes? By and large, it's extremely simple, especially if you have written your application in what one could call a modern way. Basically, by and large, going from the Ultrix R3000 to R4000 platform is very simple. It's mostly just binary compatible. There are a few cases where it might not be. If you're moving from the Ultrix or OSF1 environment on the MIPS platform to the Alpha platform, in principle, you are able to recompile, relink, and run. So it is not a complex problem for us, and the hardware abstraction layer concept is something which people use it in different ways. The thing that's convenient for us in the alpha environment is that we are capable of programming through the PAL layer on that chip to adapt to different operating systems, which is what makes it a simpler exercise. It's not entirely the same concept as what various other people call the hardware abstraction layer, but it serves basically the same purpose. So it is not difficult to move from any of those places to any of the other places, which was one of the reasons we thought that people would be interested in going directly to the alpha environment. Turned out that they were interested in staying with the MIPS environment. So is that okay?
Question here.
Will OSF1, when it runs on the R4000, be a 64-bit version of the operating system?
The question is, will the OSF1 that we put on the R4000 be a 64-bit operating system? You should be alert to the fact that both Alpha and the R4000, as a piece of background here, are 64-bit. And when you look at things, you will discover that people will use 64-bit or 32-bit, or in some cases even 16-bit environments on those chips. For example, when a Windows 3.1 application is running under NT on Alpha, it's actually executing in what it perceives as a 16-bit environment, surrounded by what NT creates as a 32-bit environment running on a 64-bit chip. So you have all these choices. The R4000 here is running the same code pool as this one here. So I need to look at my friend Glenn Johnson if he's around in the room someplace.
Our initial plans are to port to the R4000 in 32-bit, take advantage of the application compatibility. We could look at later when to do 64 bits.
Right. So one of the differentiators between the Alpha environment and the R4000 environment in this strategy would be that since the R4000 is moving basically an installed base that's going R3000, R4000 applications, it makes a lot of sense, as Glenn says, to keep compatibility between those as strictly as possible. The new applications which are going out on Alpha are being written specifically for that environment typically, or modified for that environment. It makes sense to take advantage of the full 64-bit environment. So you'll see a 64-bit OSF1 implementation on Alpha and a 32-bit continuation of the Ultrix, of the MIPS line.
Does that imply that in no time there will not be a 64-bit version of that operating system on the R4000?
No, it doesn't imply one thing or another. It just says that what we're going to put on first is 32-bit.
I've been through the 16 to 32-bit sys to RISC transition of about 5 boy, that was a nightmare.
Right. I believe that people will. Sorry. The question was. I'm sorry. Question was about whether we would move to a 64-bit environment on the R4000 sometime, and I disclaimed any knowledge of either yes or no. And basically, since that is dealing with layered product compatibility in large part, you'd expect that to stay at 32-bit, but we have no plan one way or the other at this moment. So there'll be a 32-bit one, that much we can say.
Have you been surprised by the numbers of customers who weren't ready or willing yet to migrate to Alpha sooner than you expected? And what reasons are they giving you?
Okay, so this question is about when we go and went to the customer base and talked to them and the various account managers and so on, and discovered how many people were interested in staying with the MIPS platform and with OSF on it. The basics, very strong support for the OSF 1 platform. What did we learn and were we surprised? There are two things we learned. One is we obviously were somewhat surprised because we had made a prior decision that we figured it would be okay for them. What we learned, as I mentioned earlier on, is that there are basically three different migration paths which people were looking at. Some of them were looking at keep me on Ultrix and give me more hardware of the MIPS line underneath it. Some were saying I'd like to go to OSF 1 but stay on the MIPS line for a while. And others were saying I really wanted to go to Alpha. And typically the latter case were the applications people who saw the value of being in the very high speed or large address space environment. So I guess you could say, based on that feedback, that we misjudged the mix of people in terms of what percentage of people wanted to do what. We discovered there were significant proportions of the people who wanted to do each of these things. So in that sense, we learned something. The second thing we learned is that being an open company has its drawbacks from time to time. We talk a lot about open things, open advantages, and open technology, and open software foundation. Well, this whole exercise we're talking about was an example of our open decision-making process. And sometimes, I guess, closed decision-making processes are more effective.
So is there still ongoing debate in the company about how quickly you should move to Alpha and whether MIPS is an interim platform or whether it represents a strong product for the future?
Okay, so this question is about the internal debate that might be going on about the Alpha platform versus the MIPS platform and our commitment to one and the other. Perhaps it's worthwhile pointing out that we still ship PDP-11s. And that's 20 years now. So it's clear that we have been supporting customers on platforms that they have bought for long, long periods of time after a number of people have moved to new platforms. So that there's no debate whatsoever about not supporting MIPS. The question really is about at what point, what percentage of people will want to be on which platform. Don, did you want to add to that?
Maybe I can just add a few comments to that. I do a lot of customer contact, and the response that I get is a response to both platforms. They know we're aggressively upgrading the MIPS install base, the MIPS platforms, with higher frequency R3000 daughter cards, as you have in your press release, with the R4000 daughter cards, which you just saw. And the customers are going to invest again yet more in their MIPS product lines, but they're tremendously curious also, as you would expect, about the Alpha product line. So once we call on the customer, get the information out there, they tend to relax a little bit because they know there's a commitment on both sides, and they know they will be able to move to Alpha when it's convenient for them and when the right product shows up at the right time at the right price. So we're actually dealing with a high curiosity factor right now. And most of my customers, if not all of my customers, are going to buy Alpha products as soon as possible while they are still investing in the MIPS product line. There's tremendous commonality between the product lines. Both product lines utilize the turbo channel at 50, if not 100 megabytes per second, which is the fastest I/O bus on the desktop and in that part of the market. In addition, above the bus, all the graphics cards are going to be shared between the things, as well as communication cards, as well as disk storage cards. And well above that level, the graphical APIs, the graphical applications programming interfaces of FIGS, GKS, PEX, PEXLib, and recently announced, well, not quite so recently, last September with Silicon Graphics in California, GL 5.0 is going to be supported on the platforms. So once they hear the whole story, everybody tends to relax and move ahead.
Schedule for introducing that R4000 daughter version.
The schedule, we can't see the final date, minute, and hour, but if you look,
the question again.
the schedule is what about the R4000 daughter cards? Mr. Galbots is synchronized with Mr. Stone, and if Mr. Stone can point to on the screen up there V4.3A Ultrix on the R4000, we expect this to be near the end, if I'm not incorrect here, near the end of calendar calendar 93 Q1, near the end of that quarter. That would be the beginning of the time when R4000's completely qualified as a system engine with all the graphics, with all the other options and everything else, with the next version of R4000 Ultrix.
Just to qualify that date, what he said is exactly right, but you won't see volume rollout of that until the following quarter.
I was just going to comment on your other question about were we surprised, et cetera. I think what we learned from this exercise is that we have to do a much better job in terms of planning the migration of technologies and giving much more weight perhaps than we have in the past to where the customers are, where their investments have been, and what they see as technology adequate for their needs in the foreseeable future. And as a result of this, I think we've kind of gone back and looked at a lot of transitions that we'll be going through and rethinking what is the best way to manage our way through them, giving weight to these various the various needs of the customer base as well as where we're moving in a technology sense.
Is there another question from the West Coast?
Yeah, based on your comments on the R4000, I just want to get an update on the Alpha. Do you expect that to still be out in Q4 '92 or Q1 '93? Yeah, calendar year.
Yeah.
There's been no change to the Alpha schedule.
Another here, Kate, yes.
Could you please clarify your statement about the support that you will provide for USL's Destiny to other people, but you won't ship it yourself? And if somebody wants Destiny on a deck station, who ships it?
Because the question is about the further clarification of our support, or how we're going to deal with the USL product, Unix System 5, 4.2, or Destiny. We have no intention of shipping that product ourselves on any platform. First point. Second point, what we are doing with them is we are putting our NAS layer of services on top of that operating system, just as we're doing it on top of other versions of Unix, which is, of course, easier because people are conforming more and more to the specifications from OSF. So that's not such a big deal insofar as they conform to the same specification. So if someone wanted to buy such a thing, that operating system on one of our platforms, they would have to find someone else who was going to port it and put it on the platform. I mean, that's the same is true of a number of operating systems that we don't ship that people like. So we have no intention of supporting that. Our support for OSF 1 continues steadfast, and we have no intention of supporting that particular operating system ourselves, although if someone else wants us to support it on Alpha, that's fine.
When will NAS be on top?
My guess is that NAS will be on top sometime next fall. Not this coming fall, but the 93 sometime. Well, see, they haven't shipped it yet, right?
Just add a little PS onto that. Alpha is very unique in a lot of different ways, but one of the ways is that it's been designed from the beginning to be operating system neutral. So, it's already going to run VMS, it's going to run NT, OSF. It's not unlikely that you will see other operating systems in the future on the platform. And the first one that showed some interest is USL.
Question here, John.
You said you followed that same question. You said you would help those support, wanted support, what's the level of extent? How much help are you giving?
Well, the question is about helping people who want to put operating systems onto Alpha. What we've said from the Alpha perspective is that we're selling the technology, we're selling it at all different levels of aggregation, from technology for people who want to fabricate it to chips to boards to systems. And if someone wants enough technical information to help them do the work, then we will enter into a commercial discussion with them about who gets the value out of what. But in general, we will make the information available to them in an easy way. So we're not saying that we'll go off and do the port for them. We're saying if someone wants to put something there, we will make sure they have enough information to make it technically feasible to do so. And that's been part of what we've said with respect to the Alpha program for quite a long time.
The whole true for NT, as well as something like Destiny or the System 5?
In the case of NT, we specifically are going to be shipping NT ourselves, and therefore we are doing that jointly with Microsoft.
So wouldn't the Alpha product guys like to have System 5 on Alpha supported by DEC?
Could well be. I'd like to have double my paycheck too, if that was okay. Turns out there's certain things that you might like. Our strategy is very clear. On Alpha, we are shipping 3 operating systems: VMS, OSF1, and NT.
What if someone wants Destiny on MIPS?
Question from Kate is, what if someone wants Destiny on MIPS? Well, I suppose they need to go and find someone who will sell them Destiny on MIPS. There are lots of people shipping MIPS platforms.
Yes, Chris. Can you talk a little bit about the possibility of migrating some of the VMS functionality to OSF1, specifically SMP, cluster support, either CI or DSSI?
Okay, so the question is migrating functionality currently seen in VMS onto OSF1. Well, one of the purposes of using the OSF1 technology was to take advantage of the modern operating system design principles with which it was built. And so many of those features that you mentioned are a part of the basic technology which we have acquired and which we're using to base our system on. So you would expect to see over the period of rollout here that you would more and more have all of the functionality that VMS currently has available in it in that platform. The exception would be that there's a very rich layer of layered products in various specific application areas on VMS, which you would not see duplicated for quite a long time. But as a functional operating system kernel, you'd expect to see all that technology available because that's how it was designed. So it's a matter of just rolling it out with the appropriate layered products.
We'll take one more question from the West Coast and one more from the East Coast, and then break for more informal discussion. So, Dave, is there someone in Palo Alto that has a question?
The question revolves around the porting of various operating systems. You've indicated, based on this chart, that OSF1 migrates to the MIPS architecture sometime around the middle of next year. Meanwhile, USL tomorrow will announce that NEC and Olivetti are both porting SVR 4.2 to the M6 spec, namely the big endian version. 2 questions. One, how are you going to migrate the NAS environment from little endian to big endian? And 2, why are you bothering to port OSF to the MIPS platform?
Well, to answer the second question first, which is why are we bothering to port OSF to the MIPS platform, the answer is very simple, because a large number of our customers asked us to do so, and we decided to honor their wishes. It seemed like a sensible thing to do. The first part of the question had to do with the fact that it is alleged that some people will announce a port of USL System 5 4.2 to big endian MIPS platforms, and I'm not aware of that, but it could well be true, perfectly logical. The question further was then, what would it take to put NAS on a big endian platform? Not to descend too far into the technical, big endian and little endian are no big deal, provided that the environment that you're in happens to be all one or the other. Nobody can tell the difference. What becomes interesting is when you have an environment which is half and half, or one part is, quote, big endian, one little. In such a case, it doesn't matter either, because the software automatically can, between systems, recognize which is which and switch it for you if you want. So there is no problem from a technical perspective at all. If you are constantly switching back and forth, you have a translation penalty that you might pay. But as long as you're isolating your data and your computation to mainly being local to the same size, same end, it really doesn't matter at all. So there's no technical difficulty in doing it. It's just a question of the number of times you have to do it. If you were doing it on every transfer of data from the disk, that would be kind of silly. There's a lot more detailed technical depth to that, but at a simple level, that's what it is. So NAS on top of one or the other is no big deal. You do it today.
Yes, Mary Friend.
What sort of fate does OSF1 have right now with the ACE Alliance? At one point, SCO was going to put OSF1 on, and now it's not going to, and I'm not sure where that is now. What's going to happen there?
So the question has to do with OSF1 in the context of the ACE Alliance, and further the question of what system SCO is supporting. I'm not aware of what SCO's public position is on which operating system they're supporting at the moment. But at one point, they were going to deliver their product on the MIPS platform. And I believe at this point, they have said that they are not planning to deliver their product on the MIPS platform. That's independent of whether it's going to be based on OSF1 or whatever. So as far as I know, they've made no pronouncement on the operating system, only on the hardware platform. In terms of the ACE Alliance, there are various vendors there. And I say from the software perspective, the desirability of having an OSF1 conformant set of system interfaces remains constant, as does the Windows set. So you really want to have those two layers. Each hardware vendor will make his own decision as to how he gets the technology that implements that layer of interfaces. And I don't honestly know what each of their decision is. I do know that we are producing the OSF1 system, and that we would be more than happy to help somebody who wanted to use our version on their system if that was what they like to do.
Apparently these customers that you've been talking to present a dichotomy of those who want you, who don't care whether you go directly to the Alto platform, and then there's another group that would like you to go through the MIPS platform as an interim step. Could you give us portions of customers, and more importantly, could you characterize them? How they differ in terms of their applications and other relevant factors? And secondly, in conjunction with that, if Alpha were to run into any delays, is this the strategy that you would be using?
Okay, so this question has to do with the different migration paths and what percentages of the people that we've observed and talked to were in which of those particular paths. You'll remember that you basically have the Ultrix to Ultrix on the R4000, eventually going to OSF, perhaps on the R4000, and then eventually directly to Alpha. You have the path of the current OSF1 on the R3000 or Ultrix and the R3000 going directly to Alpha OSF. And then you have the path which slides you down to OSF1 on the R3000 and then moves across. These people typically have different characteristics, as you suggest. The people going directly to the Alpha platform are typically talking about new applications which are dependent on high performance and perhaps are specifically interested in large address spaces. The classes of things that do that would be characterized as workstation type applications these days, modeling, financial modeling, simulations of things that require very large address spaces or a lot of computing power. So you typically would be looking at people who are going to take advantage of the new computing environment to write applications that specifically needed it. The people who are looking at the Ultrix line sliding MIPS technology in underneath it are the people who have existing commercially viable applications perfectly good for what they want, and they see adding more power with the minimum hassle as the important thing to do. And the people who want to move directly to an OSF1 platform on top of MIPS architecture are people typically who are policy-oriented and are interested in making sure that they conform to certain open interfaces and have technology that comes from a specific sort of open place. So those are the three different characteristics. In terms of percentages, I don't really have a good feel for the percentages, but they're a significant number of each. And so I don't know whether it's a third each or 40, 40, 20 or whatever, but a fairly significant balance of people in those different categories. Let's see, you had another question at the end there. I categorized it under when did I stop beating my wife, so it must have been something I didn't like.
Should Alpha run into problems?
Ah, yes, I got it. So the question is, if alpha were to run into problems, which of course it isn't, would this strategy be something I would do then? And the answer is, it would depend on what kind of problems they ran into. I really would not expect it to run into problems based on what I know, but if you're going to delay something, you probably want to ship something else. Would be the logic of it, but it isn't clear how different that would be. This strategy is specifically related to migration paths rather than substitutions. We continue to believe that the segment of the people who want to take the OSF 1 to alpha route direct, which is typically people taking the new applications view, will continue to do that. So I really don't have any particular comment on whether this would be a way of doing something which we're not currently concerned with.
I think with that, we probably should close the formal Q&A period. One thing that I mentioned earlier, and Don has mentioned a couple of times, is a press release on a new product. Actually, we don't have a press release, but we do have a couple of fact sheets on two new products in our RISC line. One, the personal deck station running at 33 megahertz, and the second, a new desktop server also running at 33 megahertz. We have that information for you. We'd like to be sure that you don't leave without taking a copy of that along. And we certainly invite you to remain to talk to David or Charlie, Matt, to Don. Glenn Johnson is also here, who is responsible for our OSF1 development efforts, and also Lori Buller, who is the product manager for OSF1. So they'd be happy to answer your questions. And otherwise, thank you very much for being here, and we look forward to seeing you again in the not terribly distant future. We have more Workstation announcements coming shortly. Thanks again.